Poor Janitor gave Mafia boss's crying son her only sandwich. What he did next shocked everyone. The castle's stones were old, cracked, and covered with moss, yet the walls carried the echoes of generations of kings and queens who had ruled with fear and power. Inside, the corridors were quiet, filled with whispers and shadows. Servants moved silently, their faces pale from years of working in the dim light. Alara, the youngest servant in the castle, moved carefully through the hallways. She carried a small basket with the morning's bread, still warm from the ovens. Her hands were rough from washing floors and polishing silver, but her heart had always been gentle. She had learned long ago that in a place filled with fear, kindness was a rare treasure. Her steps led her to the garden, a secret courtyard hidden behind the tallest walls. The garden had once been beautiful, filled with flowers and fountains, but now it was overgrown. Weeds twisted through the cracks in the stone paths and the fountains were dry. Yet it was quiet there, and sometimes Alara could hear the birds. This morning she was not alone. She stopped, her breath caught in her throat. There, under the twisted branches of a black willow, sat the young prince, his head bowed. Tears ran down his pale cheeks. His small hands shook as he pressed them to his face. He was no older than 12, yet something in his eyes spoke of sadness far deeper than his age. Alara's heart ached. She had heard whispers of the prince in the castle. He was the only son of King Valor, a man feared by all. They said the boy had been cursed, that his tears could call shadows from the walls and that his laughter never lasted long. Few dared approach him. Most servants kept their distance, fearing the king's wrath more than the prince's sorrow, but Alara could not leave him alone. Slowly she stepped forward, holding the basket of bread. "Your Highness," she said softly. The prince looked up, startled, wiping his tears roughly with the back of his hand. Who are you?" he asked, voice trembling. I'm Alara," she said, keeping her voice low. "I bring bread, it's warm. You must be hungry." The prince's lips trembled and he nodded. Hunger had made his cheeks hollow and his small hands shook even more. Alara knelt beside him, breaking a piece of bread and offering it to him. He hesitated, looking at her with wide eyes. I'm not supposed to eat from anyone," he whispered. "Father says," his voice broke. Alara shook her head. "Shh, it's all right, I don't care what anyone says, you need to eat." Slowly he took the bread, small hands trembling as he tore it into pieces. The warm scent of the bread seemed to fill the garden, a small comfort in the cold, gray morning. He ate silently, and for the first time that day, Alara saw a flicker of peace in his eyes. I've never had anyone care before," he admitted quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. They all fear me, even the servants." Alara's heart ached. She reached out and placed a hand lightly on his arm. "You are not alone now," she said softly. "Not while I am here." The prince's eyes met hers. In them she saw a storm, loneliness, fear, and a strange longing. But she also saw hope, fragile but real. He finished the bread, and for the first time he smiled, small and uncertain, yet bright enough to light the shadows around them. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and the trees in the garden groaned as if the castle itself were warning them. Alara's heart skipped. She knew the king's presence was never far, and she feared the boy would be punished for taking food from a servant. "Please go back before someone sees you," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, stay with me, just a little while longer." Alara hesitated but remained. They sat together, speaking in whispers. The prince told her of the cold chambers, the endless lessons in swordplay and courtly etiquette, and of the nights when shadows whispered terrible things to him. He spoke of loneliness, of being watched but never loved, and of the fear that he would never escape the curse that seemed to cling to his very skin. Alara listened, her hand on his shoulder. She wanted to tell him everything would be all right, that the curse could be broken, that kindness could be stronger than fear. But she knew it was not so simple. The world of Duskspire had rules that even the kindest hearts could not break without cost. Time passed and the sky darkened further. Clouds swallowed the weak morning light, turning the garden into a dim, shadowed world. The prince shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of the sadness that seemed to follow him everywhere. I wish I could be brave, he said quietly, but I am always afraid. Alara looked at him, her eyes steady. Bravery is not the absence of fear, she said softly. It is doing what you must, even when you are afraid. You are braver than you know. He looked at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. You really think so? I do, she said, smiling gently. And one day you will see it too. But before he could answer, a shadow fell across the garden. Alara's heart stopped. The prince stiffened. They were not alone. King Valor stepped into the courtyard, his cloak black as night, his eyes, sharp as blades, fixed on them. The young prince tried to hide behind Alara, but she gently pushed him behind her, placing herself in front of him. "Who is this girl?" the king demanded, voice low and dangerous. "Why is she here with my son?" Alara bowed quickly, keeping her voice calm despite the fear knotting her stomach. "Your Majesty, I found the prince crying. He was hungry. I gave him bread." The king's eyes narrowed. His gaze swept over her, cold and assessing. "You gave my son food," he said slowly. "Do you know what you have done?" Alara swallowed. "I only wanted to help your Majesty, nothing more." King Valor's lips pressed into a thin line. He studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he turned and left the courtyard without another word, leaving a silence heavier than the storm clouds above. The prince let out a shaky breath. He could have punished you," he whispered. Alara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We must be careful, but sometimes even the smallest act of kindness is worth the risk." The prince looked at her, a mixture of admiration and wonder in his eyes. You are different," he said softly. Alara shook her head. "I am just a servant, but I will stand by you as long as I can." They sat together for a while longer, sharing the quiet. The bread was gone, but something stronger remained: trust, a fragile connection in a world filled with fear. As Alara finally stood to leave, the wind carried a strange sound through the trees, like a whispering voice calling the prince's name. He shivered, and the shadows around them seemed to stir, as if alive. The young prince looked at her, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "Alara, what is happening to me?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. She knew the rumors were true, the curse was real. It had marked him long before she had met him, and yet she could not let fear rule them. She reached out and took his hand. "We will face it together," she said quietly, her voice firm despite the tremble in her chest. "No matter what comes, you will not be alone." The prince squeezed her hand, a small flicker of hope in his eyes. But deep in the shadows of the castle, unseen and silent, something stirred. The curse had noticed, and it did not forgive. A chill ran through the garden as the wind howled like a living thing. Alara felt it brush past her, a cold warning. She looked at the prince, who was pale and trembling, and knew that their lives had changed forever. The small act of kindness, the sharing of bread, had awakened forces far greater than either of them. And as she left the garden, the prince whispered a promise to himself. "I will not be afraid. I will protect her, even if it costs me everything." But neither of them knew how dangerous the coming days would be, nor how deep the darkness would reach into the heart of Duskspire. The castle had secrets, and one small act of compassion had set them all in motion. The shadowed halls whispered their warning. Nothing in Duskspire was ever simple, and nothing in the prince's heart would remain the same. The morning after the garden encounter, the castle of Duskspire was colder than usual. The wind whispered through the cracked stone walls, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into every room. Servants hurried along the corridors, heads down, glancing nervously at the empty throne hall. Whispers of fear and suspicion flowed through the castle like smoke. Alara moved carefully through the hallways, her basket empty now. The bread had been gone in the garden, but the memory of the young prince's small smile stayed with her. She wondered if she had done the right thing. Even a simple act of kindness in Duskspire could invite danger, and she feared what King Valor might think. As she approached the prince's chambers, she noticed a shadow in the hallway. It moved silently, slipping along the wall as if it were part of the darkness itself. Her heart beat faster. She could not see what it was clearly, but the feeling of being watched pressed down on her chest. Inside the prince's room, the boy sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, and his shoulders trembled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Good morning, Your Highness," Alara said softly. She kept her voice calm, though the shadow outside made her skin prickle. The prince looked up, eyes wide. "Alara, did father see us?" "No," she replied quickly. "He left the garden without a word, but we must be careful. He watches more than we know." The prince swallowed hard and nodded. I wish I could leave this place. The walls feel heavy, like they are closing in." Alara moved closer and sat beside him. "I know it is hard," she said gently, "but even here we can find moments of peace. We can share them as long as we are careful." For a moment they sat together in silence. Outside the wind howled, rattling the shutters and sending loose stones tumbling down the cliff. Inside, the room felt small and fragile, yet safe for a brief moment. Then the door creaked. Alara froze. A tall figure filled the doorway, and her heart sank. King Valor's eyes were sharp and cold, like knives cutting through the dim light. "Stay where you are," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Do not move." The prince shrank back against the wall. "Father," he whispered, voice trembling. Alara stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Your Majesty, I only—" The king silenced her with a sharp look. He stepped fully into the room, his gaze fixed on Alara. "You gave my son food," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight, and the air itself seemed to tighten around them. "I only wanted to help Your Majesty," Alara said. "He was hungry, and I could not leave him alone." King Valor's eyes flicked to the prince. "Do you even understand what you have done?" he asked, voice colder now. "The boy is cursed. Every act of kindness, every touch of warmth, risks awakening the shadows that follow him." The prince looked at Alara, fear and guilt swirling in his eyes. I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said softly. The king's lips pressed together. For a long moment he said nothing, as if measuring their hearts. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again. "Alara, you may remain in the castle. You will serve directly in my son's chambers. But know this, one mistake and you will not leave alive. Do you understand?" Alara swallowed hard but nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." The king turned and left the room, his heavy cloak brushing the floor. The door closed with a thud, leaving the room silent save for the wind and the boy's quiet breathing. The prince let out a shaky breath. You saved me, and now you must stay here even under father's eyes." Alara nodded. "I will stay. As long as I am allowed, I will stay by your side. You are not alone, not anymore." He looked at her, and in that moment something shifted. Hope, fragile and trembling, bloomed in his heart. Yet beneath it, fear still lurked, fear of the curse, fear of the king, fear of what the shadows might bring. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Alara moved through the castle like a shadow herself, always careful, always alert. The prince began to show small signs of life, smiling faintly at her jokes, asking her questions about the outside world. He wanted to believe that kindness could exist in the walls of Duskspire, and Alara worked silently to nurture that belief. But the shadows were always present. Doors creaked in empty halls. Candles flickered for no reason. Sometimes, when the prince's eyes met hers, she thought she could see shapes moving just beyond the corner of the room, whispering to him in voices only he could hear. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Alara found the prince standing at the edge of the balcony. He looked down at the black waves crashing against the rocks below, lost in thought. "I wish I could be free," he whispered. "Free of the curse, free of father, free of all of this." Alara stepped beside him. "Sometimes freedom begins in the heart," she said softly. "You cannot escape the castle, not yet, but you can choose what lives in your heart. You can choose hope." He turned to her, eyes shining with a mixture of longing and fear. "Hope. I do not know if I have enough of it. The curse, it grows stronger every day. Sometimes I feel it inside me like a fire that will not go out." Ilara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone." The prince nodded, but the wind whipped around them and a shadow flitted across the balcony railing, moving with a mind of its own. He shivered. "Ilara, did you see that?" he asked, voice low. Ilara followed his gaze, but the shadow was gone. "The wind plays tricks," she said quickly. "Perhaps it is only your imagination." But even as she spoke, a chill ran down her spine. She knew better. The curse had noticed them. It was aware of every act of kindness, every moment of warmth, and it did not forgive. That night, Ilara returned to the servant quarters, but sleep would not come. Her mind replayed the prince's pale face, the fear in his eyes, and the shadow she had seen on the balcony. She knew the coming days would be dangerous. The next morning she was called to the king's private chambers. Her heart pounded as she entered. King Valor sat behind a massive desk, his expression unreadable. "Ilara," he said, his voice low, "the boy is changing. He is showing signs of hope, signs of life. I do not like this. The curse exists for a reason. It protects him from weakness." Ilara bowed. "Your Majesty, I only wish to guide him, to keep him safe." The king's eyes narrowed. "Do you understand the danger you bring? One act of care, one smile, and the shadows will follow him. You risk everything by remaining near him." "I understand," Ilara said quietly, though her heart trembled. The king studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You may stay. But remember this, loyalty to the boy is not loyalty to me. Betray me and you will answer to the curse itself." Ilara nodded. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. She knew the king was testing her, measuring her courage and her heart. She would not fail. Days turned into weeks. Ilara and the prince found moments of quiet joy. They explored the hidden corners of the castle together, shared stories, and laughed softly at small, silly things. For a little while the shadows receded, and the boy's laughter became a sound that warmed even the coldest corners of the castle. Yet the curse was never far. At night, the prince dreamed of dark forests and whispering shadows. Sometimes he would wake screaming, and Ilara would sit by his side, holding his hand until he calmed. Each night, the shadows seemed to grow bolder, creeping closer to the boy's door, listening, waiting. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Ilara found the prince standing alone in the garden once more. The rain soaked his clothes, but he did not move. He looked at her, eyes dark and haunted. "Ilara, I think the shadows are learning," he said quietly. "They know you are here. They know what we share. They are testing me, testing us." Ilara stepped forward, placing her hand on his arm. "Then we must be stronger," she said firmly. "We cannot let them win. Whatever comes, we face it together." He nodded, but his gaze drifted to the distant cliffs where lightning split the sky. "I am afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of losing you, afraid of what I might become." Ilara squeezed his hand. "Fear is natural," she said, "but it will not control us. Not if we hold to what is good and not if we trust each other." They stood together, watching the storm, finding courage in each other's presence. But deep within the castle, unseen and silent, the shadows stirred. They whispered to each other, dark voices weaving through the walls. The curse had taken notice of the bond forming between the prince and Ilara. It would not allow it to grow without challenge. And in that moment, a single thought passed through the boy's mind, trembling and fearful. Can kindness truly overcome a curse? The answer would come soon enough, and it would test their hearts in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The castle of Duskspire had awakened, and nothing within its walls would remain the same. The shadows had grown bolder in Duskspire. They whispered through the halls at night, their voices curling around the boy's mind, tugging at his thoughts. He woke in the darkness more often now, trembling and wide-eyed, haunted by images of forests filled with twisted trees and glowing eyes. Ilara moved quietly through the castle each morning, her hands carrying food or clean cloth, her mind alert for any sign of danger. She had begun to notice subtle changes in the prince. His movements were more tense, his eyes constantly scanning corners, as if expecting shadows to appear at any moment. Yet beneath the fear, she saw something else: determination. Something fragile, like a candle flickering against the wind. One evening the prince approached her in the hidden courtyard. The moon, full and pale, hung low in the sky, washing the garden in silver light. The black willow swayed in the wind, its branches creaking. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and stone. "Ilara," he whispered, voice hesitant, I cannot live like this forever. The curse, it grows stronger every day. If I do nothing, I will be consumed by it. I want to try something dangerous, something forbidden." Ilara's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, eyes wide and serious. "I have heard of a place in the forest outside the castle, a glade where spirits dwell. They say it reflects a person's heart. It could help me confront the curse, or it could destroy me." Ilara swallowed hard. "The forest is dangerous. Many have gone and never returned. Even if the glade can help, we do not know what waits there. I cannot let you go alone." The prince reached for her hand, his small fingers trembling. "Then go with me. I trust you more than anyone. If I am to face the darkness, I need you beside me." Her heart ached at his words. She knew the forest could kill them both, yet she could not refuse. "Then we go together," she said softly. They left the castle under the cover of night, moving silently through corridors and gates, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of the guards. Beyond the outer walls, the cliffs loomed, black waves crashing against jagged rocks. The forest waited ahead, thick with mist and ancient trees whose branches twisted like fingers reaching for the sky. The path was narrow and steep, and shadows seemed to follow them, flickering between the trunks and whispering unintelligible words. Ilara kept a hand on the prince's shoulder, guiding him, offering quiet comfort as they moved. He clung to her presence like a lifeline, his trust a fragile shield against the darkness. Hours passed, and finally they reached the glade. The air was different there, thicker, heavier, as if the world itself had stopped to watch. Silver light from the moon illuminated the clearing, and in its center stood a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting their faces. The trees around the glade bent inward slightly, forming a natural dome, and the whispers of the forest were almost musical. The prince stepped forward, staring into the water. "The spirits, they will show me what I am," he said, voice trembling. "They will show the curse and me." Ilara moved beside him. "Then face it with courage. I am here. You are not alone." He took a deep breath and knelt before the pool. The water shimmered, and then, as if alive, images began to form. Shadows of the past danced across the surface. The prince's parents arguing in the throne room, servants hiding in fear, faces filled with judgment and cruelty. Then his own reflection shifted. He saw himself twisted by the curse, eyes glowing with shadow, hands clawing at the air. He gasped and fell back on his knees, shaking. I am afraid," he whispered. "I am afraid I cannot be what I want to be, that the darkness will win." Ilara knelt beside him, taking his hand. "The darkness is part of you, yes, but it is not all of you. Bravery is not being without fear. It is standing even when fear is strong. You have courage in your heart, trust it." The prince's eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw something break, a small, fragile crack in the wall of despair that had held him for years. His fingers tightened around hers. Together, they reached into the pool. The water shimmered and rose in a spiral, forming shapes of light and shadow, twisting around them. The whispers grew louder, voices of spirits murmuring secrets, truths, and fears. Each step they took closer to the center brought them more revelations, betrayals from the past, mistakes they could not undo, and pain they had carried alone for years. Alara's own past began to surface. Memories of being ignored as a child, of living in the shadows of others' cruelty, of fear and longing for someone to care. She realized the glade was not only revealing the prince's heart, but also hers. She leaned close to him. "We are not alone in this," she said softly. "The pain, the fear, the mistakes, they are part of life. We can carry them together." The prince nodded, tears in his eyes. I do not want to hurt anyone anymore. I want to be free of the curse, free of the shadows, free of all the fear inside me." They stayed in the glade for hours, confronting their fears, facing the shadows of their hearts. Slowly, the water in the pool began to calm. The shapes of light and shadow that had twisted around them settled, merging into a soft glow that filled the clearing. The whispering voices faded into silence. For the first time, the prince felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Not complete, not permanent, but a glimmer of hope, a sense that the darkness could be met and overcome. Alara smiled at him. "You are stronger than you know," she said, "and we will face whatever comes next together." But the moment of calm was short-lived. The pool rippled violently, and the silver light of the glade dimmed. Shadows, darker than any they had seen before, rose from the edges of the forest, curling toward them like smoke with intent and intelligence. "They are angry," the prince whispered, his hand gripping hers tightly. "The curse, it knows we are trying to change it." Alara stood, holding his hand firmly. "Then we will not run, we face it together." The shadows surged closer, forming shapes that resembled creatures of smoke and flame. They whispered threats, promises of pain, and warnings of the darkness that would never forgive their defiance. The prince's heart raced, fear clawing at him. But as he looked at Alara, he realized something vital. He was not alone. He was not powerless. She was there, and her courage gave him strength. He stepped forward, facing the shadows, his hand still in hers. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice breaking the quiet of the forest. "You do not control me. I am not yours to claim." The shadows faltered, hesitated, and then recoiled, as if struck by the force of his will. The prince felt warmth spread through his chest, a power that came not from magic or spells, but from hope, courage, and the bond he shared with Alara. The shadows dispersed, retreating into the forest with angry whispers that promised they would return. The glade was silent once more, silver light reflecting in the pool, calm and still. Alara turned to him, her eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered. "You faced it and did not give in." The prince sank to his knees, breathing heavily, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. I could not have done it without you," he said softly. "I am not strong alone." "You are stronger than you know," she said, smiling gently. "And together we can face anything." He looked at her, tears in his eyes. For a moment, the fear, the shadows, and the curse all seemed distant. All that mattered was her hand in his, her presence beside him. And yet, even as they rested in the glade, a faint rustle came from the trees. A single shadow, darker than the rest, lingered at the edge of the clearing. It watched them, silent, intelligent, and patient. The curse was not gone. It had been challenged, yes, but it would not forgive so easily. The prince shivered, sensing it even without looking. "Alara, it is not over," he said quietly. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "No, but we have faced it together, and that matters." They stayed in the glade until dawn, the first pale light filtering through the mist. The storm of the night had passed, leaving calm and silence. The curse had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and revealed their deepest fears. But it had also shown them a truth stronger than shadows. Courage, hope, and the bond between two hearts could shine brighter than any darkness. As they prepared to return to the castle, neither spoke of the lingering shadow that still followed them, hidden among the trees. But both knew, deep in their hearts, that the true test was yet to come. The prince whispered a promise to himself, steady and determined. "I will not allow the curse to define me. I will fight, and I will protect the ones I love." And Alara, walking beside him, knew she would stand by his side, no matter what awaited them within the walls of Duskspire. The castle of Duskspire lay silent under the first light of dawn, though the air was thick with tension. Wordless fear lingered in the halls like dust. The shadows that had followed the prince and Alara from the glade clung to the walls, curling around the pillars, silent and patient. The young prince and Alara entered the castle cautiously. Every footstep seemed to echo like a drum in the empty corridors. Guards moved in their routines, unaware of the power brewing behind the castle walls, yet the air itself seemed charged, warning them of the approaching storm. "Alara," the prince whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "The shadows, they followed us back. I can feel them." Alara's hand gripped his tightly. "Then we must face them together. Fear will not save us, only courage will." They reached the throne room, the heart of the castle, where King Valor awaited. The king's presence filled the room like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. He sat upon the throne, his eyes sharper than ever, yet there was a hint of curiosity in them. He had sensed the change in his son, seen the defiance, and now he wanted to measure it. "You return from the forest," the king said, voice calm but heavy. "I see the glade has not destroyed you." The prince stepped forward, shoulders squared, hands still in Alara's. "It did not destroy me, father. It showed me the truth. I am stronger than the shadows, and I will not allow them to rule me." King Valor's eyes narrowed. Bold words for a boy who has lived in fear all his life. "Do you truly believe you can control the curse?" Alara stepped beside him, her voice steady. "It is not control alone, your majesty. It is courage, hope, and trust. We faced the darkness together, and we have not been broken." The king studied them in silence, then motioned toward the throne. "Very well. If you have gained strength in the glade, then you must prove it here, within the walls of Duskspire. The shadows you carry are not yet tamed. They are mine, inherited from the curse that binds this family. Show me, show yourself." At that moment the shadows surged from the corners of the room. Dark shapes, twisting and flickering like living smoke, advanced toward the prince. The air grew heavy and the torches flickered violently. The room itself seemed to shrink under the weight of the darkness. The prince raised his head, his voice clear and steady. "I am not yours. I am not the curse." The shadows hesitated, recoiling slightly at the strength of his will. Alara's presence beside him lent courage to his heart, and he felt a warmth, fragile but strong, spreading through his chest. "Together," Alara whispered. He nodded. The prince stepped forward, reaching out to the shadows, not with fear but with intention. "You do not own me. You are part of me, yes, but you will not control me. I will carry the light with me, and it will be stronger than your darkness." The shadows writhed and twisted, voices rising in furious whispers. Yet the prince and Alara stood firm, hands clasped, hearts bound in trust. Slowly the shadows began to falter, their forms shrinking, their shapes unraveling like mist in sunlight. King Valor watched in silence, eyes narrowing as he saw the power of courage and human connection at work. Something he had never considered: love, hope, and trust could indeed challenge even the deepest curses. The largest shadow, darker and heavier than the rest, rose at the center of the room. It spoke, not with words but with a presence that pressed on their minds, threatening to overwhelm them with fear. The prince's knees shook under the weight of its power. I will not let you define me," he said, voice firm despite the trembling. "I choose who I am, not what you demand." Alara placed her hand on his chest. "You are not alone. We face this together." The shadow faltered, then roared in a soundless scream. The prince drew a deep breath, filling his lungs with courage. He reached out and touched it, not with violence but with understanding. Slowly, light began to bloom from his chest, spreading outward. The shadow recoiled, hissing, writhing, then dissolved into a soft mist, leaving only calm in its wake. The room was quiet. The shadows that had filled the corners of the throne room vanished, leaving only the silver light from the torches. The air felt lighter, almost alive. The curse had been challenged and the prince had emerged stronger. King Valor rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "So, this is the power of courage, trust, and hope," he said quietly. "Perhaps I underestimated you, my son." The prince bowed slightly, still holding Alara's hand. "It is not just me, father. It is her courage, too. Together, we faced what seemed impossible." The king's eyes softened, a rare moment of warmth breaking through his usual sternness. "I have ruled this castle with fear for many years," he said, voice low. "Perhaps I have forgotten what it means to protect without fear. You have reminded me in your own way." The prince looked at him, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "I wish to protect the castle not through fear but through hope." King Valor studied his son, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We will see if you can live up to that promise. But remember, power is never without consequence. You must remain strong always." The prince turned to Alara, gratitude and affection shining in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "Together." Alara smiled softly. "Yes, together." For a moment the castle seemed to breathe, the tension lifting as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath. The prince had faced the curse, and he had not only survived but grown stronger. The bond between him and Alara had proven that courage and compassion could indeed challenge the darkest forces. Yet, as they moved through the halls, King Valor's voice echoed behind them. "You have shown strength, my son, but remember the shadows are never truly gone. They may sleep, but they wait, and they will return." The prince nodded, accepting the truth in his father's words. "Then we will be ready," he said. "We will face whatever comes together." The days that followed were filled with quiet triumph. The prince trained with new determination, not only in swordplay but in the wisdom of ruling, learning to temper strength with compassion. Alara remained by his side, guiding him through the corridors, sharing stories, and quietly teaching him the value of patience and understanding. The castle began to change. Servants moved more freely, fear lessened in the halls, and even the walls seemed lighter, as if the hope that bloomed in the prince's heart had begun to touch every stone. Yet both Alara and the prince knew the curse had not been completely destroyed. It had been challenged, yes, but darkness never truly disappears. It waits, patient and cunning. And in the quiet moments, they sometimes felt a lingering presence, a shadow at the edge of their vision, reminding them that vigilance was always necessary. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, the prince and Alara stood on the balcony, overlooking the sea. The waves sparkled in the fading light, and the wind carried the scent of salt and freedom. "Alara," the prince said softly, "I never believed I could feel hope like this. But you showed me that even in the darkest places there is light." Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the last rays of the sun. "And you showed me that courage can grow in the smallest heart, even one that has known fear for so long." He took her hand gently, holding it between both of his. "I promise to protect you as you have protected me. Whatever comes, we face it together." She smiled, a warmth blooming in her chest. "I will always stand by your side." The wind picked up, rustling the black willow trees in the garden below, carrying with it a quiet whisper of the shadows, yet neither of them feared it. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The prince had learned that courage, hope, and trust could shine brighter than fear, and Alara had learned that compassion could transform even the heaviest hearts. Together, they turned from the balcony, stepping back into the castle. The corridors were no longer filled with oppressive shadows, but with light filtered through the high windows. They walked side by side, ready to face whatever future awaited them, bound by the courage and trust that had saved them both. And though the curse had not vanished completely, its power had been challenged. The prince's heart was stronger, his mind clearer, and his spirit freer. And as long as he had Alara by his side, he knew they could face any shadow, endure any storm, and protect the light that now lived in the heart of Duskspire. The castle had changed, but more importantly, the prince and Alara had changed. They had learned that courage and love could challenge the darkest forces, and that even in the deepest shadows, light could be found. For the first time, the young Prince of Duskspare smiled freely, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with hope. And beside him, Alara's presence was a quiet promise of strength, trust, and the enduring power of the heart.